let me talk a little about Cherry Tail, who have been kind enough to sponsor today's video. Cherry Tail is an RPG mobile game by Aero Labs. Aero Labs have made a game with some genuinely interesting lore, and a very, how should I say, provocative setup. When I say that, I have to say right out the gate, this is for the mature audiences in the crowd. You won't actually find this game on the iOS App Store or the Google Play Store, but it can instead be accessed through the dedicated website itself. When you do, you'll be audienced to the backdrop of a world where humans have triumphed in a war between fallen angels for hundreds of years. The player acts as a devil king, accidentally summoned by an incarnation of Cinderella. In fact, this game takes many of those classical literature characters and fills them into this fantasy world. As the Devil King, you go about changing this world by killing monsters with these characters in your posse, and then you are rewarded most handsomely for your efforts. And that reward is exactly why it cannot be shown on the public app stores, if you know what I mean. I had no idea this kind of game even existed. This contains content which I cannot show on the screen, and more content that I really can't show on the screen. So check it out. Download the game using the link below. Enter my promo code ALEXENTPROMO with a capital A before August 15th in your game profile settings to unlock exclusive in-game prizes. Be sure to download and use that code before August 15th, guys. And if you're watching this video after that point, still give the game a download using the link which is in the description and the pinned comment down below. Thank you so much, Cherry Tail, for sponsoring this video. Monster is genius. There, I don't think anyone's going to argue with that one. The manga by Naoki Urasawa is one of the best ever made. And really, it's shockingly common for this man to achieve that. But the anime, oh my god, the anime for this series, the aesthetic, the voice acting, and the music is just... To get into why this series is so special, we're going to tap into Naoki Urasawa's other works, his personal life, the anime, and other people in the industry who just happen to be in the right place at the right time for this magic to happen in the first place. Some people say that this series is underrated, but it isn't really. It's the 25th highest rated anime and the 5th highest manga on Mal, and we'll be going through them both, so don't worry. But yeah, it isn't underrated. It certainly isn't overrated, and maybe that makes it hard to categorize, but it's perfectly well loved, and peeling back different layers and elements really complements the whole production. I'll also be going into this book, Another Monster, which takes place after the events of the main series. So if you've never seen Monster, here is your warning. There is about to be massive spoilers all over the place. Grab yourself a snack, this one will be a long and winding video, much like the murder mystery it details. So let's explore the genius of Master Keaton. Yeah, that's right. This entire video was a cover for the true genius of Master Keaton. No, I'm kidding you. This is the genius of Monster, but also the first chapter is not a joke either, and Master Keaton is very much just as genius in my eyes, so let me just lay all of this out. When I first watched Monster and then went on to read it, I was taken aback by how steeped in psychological studies and European culture it was, to such a perfect recreation. Urasawa seemed to put together a story which seamlessly belonged in its setting, with one of the strongest tones to start a manga as ever there was. Years after having seen and read the series, I was stunned and thought to myself, this might be the most inadvertently strong start to a manga that's ever been made. Now that was before I knew about Master Keaton. Master Keaton is the predecessor to Monster. Being written mainly by Urasawa's editor and only inked by himself, Master Keaton was a collaborative manga project which saw the titular character solving mysteries like a Japanese Columbo, a perfect show to watch both drunk and hungover, a boast few shows can claim. The stories have the same light and dark notes that Monster would develop, with there actually being controversy over who wrote any of the stories. At one point it was Urasawa and Kokusei Katsushige, but he died in 2004. With an interview detailing that Urasawa fell out with him a decent chunk of time before his death. A close friend of Katsushige denied this so vehemently that he got the series pulled out of publication in 2005. Urasawa has always created the characters he himself implores, alleging that he never even would have had a co-writer if the manga trusted him capable of writing two stories at the same time in the first place. The other series in question was Yawara, which we'll get to in due course. But then he goes on to say that the last two volumes are, fair to say, his in their entirety. So what are we to make of all of this? It's a cloudy topic, and a fitting one when it comes to the espionage and fraudulent themes of the series. I'm inclined to just believe Urasawa, considering how much this series didn't just scratch the monster itch, but gave a new perspective on it entirely for me. There is also the fact that he's worked on 2 series concurrently for most of his career. Before this it was Pineapple Army alongside Yawara, then Yawara and Master Keaton. Then after this it would be Happy and Monster, then 20th Century Boys and Pluto. So there is certainly evidence to Urasawa's point of view. But anyway, this video wouldn't even be made if not for stumbling upon Master Keaton like I have. It's an episodic anime, with the backdrop being a university lecturer basically pulling a sickie on all of his students and going around the world instead to solve mysteries. The backdrop is about as cliché as you could imagine, so it's heartening to think that the actual content doesn't rely on this and actually consists of a series of about 40 strong scripts that serve as brilliant episodic vignettes. Strange Tale of Lasagna is the 3rd episode of the series, and it's the one that tugged on my heartstrings, charmed me, had me engaged, and made me fall in love with the series. It's the tale of a little girl living with her estranged family on her father's side due to his death. Her mother, having had an affair, lost custody of her, and so the little girl is almost locked away, out of sight, by her paternal grandmother. Master Keaton is an unbiased private investigator with a big heart and a kind soul. It's the perfect kind of episodic storytelling, because each character has a unique history and relationship which works differently from the last, and all work to tell an outstanding slice of life on such a scale that it borders on exploring human nature better than I've ever seen it explored. Keaton is hired by the mother in this episode and doesn't really end up sorting out the problems of this little girl, Flora, but kind of just acts as her supporter, which is, it turns out, all she ever needed. The second he's there, she's as outspoken and as opinionated as everyone else, just that no one was really there to listen. He's a vehicle for her character development, as she wants to live with her mother, but be able to see her grandmother on her father's side too. So with Keaton in tow, she accomplishes just that. Another great episode is the one right after this, funnily enough, Immortal Man. This one sees Keaton run into an old man on the snowy mountains of Poland, a man with an incredible story of treasure whilst he's pursued by violent assailants. The two confide in each other, waiting out the storm together in exchange for each other's story. It's a realistic exchange of human interaction which helps us understand the plot of the episode, but also builds around the main character. This one explores the naivety of seeking glory and the importance of connecting with each other. It really didn't seem to be an emotional episode, but it's just another. It just sucker punches you with its points and leaves you with a deep love of Keaton and just an admiration of how a fucking cartoon makes you realize the preciousness of life. Jesus, this show is so good. Some episodes go back to the university which Keaton works in, and so there isn't exactly an overarching story as such, but it builds up his character and those around him, like his daughter. Once again, the Strange Tale of Lasagna planted the seeds for it, with how Keaton interacts and helps this little girl. The story dips us lightly into his world, showing how he interacts with people so we can get the measure of the man before his actual life is put in the spotlight. It's such a nonchalant character development, it's genius in its own right. I actually only watched the show, ironically, because I found a sale really cheap and thought, I may as well. A nice piece of Urasawa's character design to hang up. That'll be nice. God, I didn't expect to cherish it as much as I do now, as the show really became a gem in my eyes and a worthy stepping stone to the types of stories Monster would tell. If you at all liked The Girl and the Seasoned Soldier, an absolutely sublime episode of Monster which touched on humanity and the consequences of human loss, or if you like The Magnificent Steiner and the episodes around the tragic character of Grimmer, then you will love at least half the outings of Master Keaton. The profundity of Monster and its themes are all born in this manga, and funnily enough, Master Keaton's vibe really kind of stems from the fact that this was Urasawa's 3rd series, a kind of thematic blend between the military manga of Pineapple Army and the more down-to-earth romantic comedy of Yawara. To talk about one last episode, I swear I'll move on after this. Wall in One's Heart is the story of a man who escaped East Germany and now lives with his wife and daughter like a normal man in West Germany. He's successful and even now has a new babysitter, but he carries a deep secret. He actually left his first wife in East Germany. She was pregnant at the time and didn't want to endanger the child. This man is torn by not knowing about his daughter or what happened to his first wife, and the one thing that sticks with him is this music box that he gave to his daughter as a keepsake in his absence. The song haunts him, and his youngest daughter actually sings this tune because with the need to get this off his chest, he told his youngest that the tune was from a music box to someone extremely important to him. After Keaton gets involved and they go through many contacts, it's discovered that the wife unfortunately passed away in East Germany years ago. but his first daughter survived and moved beyond the Berlin Wall to West Germany under adoption. They learned that she gravely injured her adoptive father, and when they go to other local areas for info, they discover through colleagues that she planned to find her biological father and get revenge on him for abandoning her and her mother. In a panic as to his family, Keaton gets the man back home. The babysitter, it turns out, was the daughter all along, and now she's going to take action. She's about to hurt the youngest daughter. She's about to strangle her in a reenactment of one of the girl's favourite stories, but she's stopped in her tracks when she hears her sing the song, and is brought to tears when she hears from her that the tune was from a music box to someone extremely important to her father. She breaks down from the sadness of it all and turns around, seeing him, the final piece falling into place. A family restored. Other great and emotional episodes include Paris Under the Roof, Journey with a Lady, Special Menu, and many more. If you want a great time watching a short story or two, just stick some Keaton on. Oh, and by the way, if you like Monster, then you might be interested to know that the same guy who did the music for Monster also did the music for this. The mangaka, musician, producer, and animation studio are all the same. If anything, I prefer the visuals of Keaton to Monster. It was made on cell after all, so it's all on film. We could one day see this in 4K, whereas Monster was made via paper and digital. Obviously the manga is all illustrated by Urasawa too, so the look is exactly the same, with the anime also picking up his distinctive and lovely to look at characters. His artwork of Western characters perfectly portrays their Nordic features, and just like Monster with Kenzo Tenma, Keaton is a Japanese man living in this world. So we really have almost a template for what's to come. If anything, to that end, it almost makes you wonder if the issues that came with publishing the series is why Monster started so soon after Master Keaton's end, and potentially why it has such a similarity to it. Was Monster originally going to be the grand finale of Master Keaton? One long arc about a serial killer who elusively rivals him and his investigative ability? Did Urasawa simply make Monster separate to avoid any legal disputes around Katsushige and his friends? Even if that wasn't directly the case, sometimes ideas simmer and creators channel alternative concepts through new entities entirely. Like 10 different Stephen King books all starting with the same premise, maybe Monster is the unfinished ideas of Master Keaton being digested into something new. They're both even set around the same time, with the East and Western Germany divide playing a large role at points in both series. Both of these characters could literally just bump into each other technically, that is, assuming they aren't the same person to begin with. Lunge suspects Tenma of murder when Johann covers his tracks by killing Adolf Junkers, the only man who knows about Johann, thus pinning all the murders on Tenma. With Tenma being honest to the police investigation and blaming Johann, the boy he saved years ago, Lunge ends up wondering if Tenma has a split personality. The show ends up making you wonder about it yourself. Maybe Johann is really in Tenma's mind. But no, the true split personality is Tenma and Keaton. Both Japanese, well-educated and living in Germany at the same point in time, they're both Japanese, and one intro is light whilst the other is dark. They're both Japanese. Maybe there is some credence to Urasawa changing things because of the drama surrounding Keaton. Urasawa did personally see to it that Katsushige's name be reduced in size on the front covers, so that his name was bigger. A clear assertion that the series was always mainly his, but it's hard to know for sure. It's also incredibly petty for it not to kind of support some of these arguments. Maybe one day we'll find out, but either way, Master Keaton has highs and lows, like any show, but the highs reach that of Monster, and it's the perfect precursor and foundation as to why Monster is genius in the first place. Who is this man, and why is he so important to the world of anime? As stated before, Masao Maruyama was the producer for the Master Keaton anime. He was also the producer for the Monster anime. In fact, both of these anime were made by Studio Madhouse. Madhouse itself is the animation studio created by Masao Maruyama, himself personally overseeing the works he wants to make in a producing role. He's famously worked with Satoshi Kon too, producing all of his films and actually wanting to make another Naoki Urasawa anime in the form of Pluto, though bureaucracy had gotten in the way, with Maruyama creating new companies twice to avoid the anime machines that the studios have now become, making all of the big adaptations. You could say though that the industry has really followed this man's lead. He made Madhouse and left due to creative differences, made Mappa and left due to that same exact issue, and now he's made Studio M too. and I eagerly await Studio M2's Pluto, which we can thankfully now see is going to be a beautiful little show, coming out soon on Netflix. Don't worry, I talk about Pluto several more times later in the video. But Masao Maruyama is a veteran of the anime world, and he associates himself with distinct and noteworthy projects. He did with Master Keaton, and he did with Monster. Everything he's worked on has an atmosphere which matches the manga to a T, with Monster's aesthetic being a darkly lit, gothic landscape. Where Master Keaton went around the globe, it did sometimes land itself in the same locations as Monster, but everything in that series had a tinge of light and positivity, taking place surrounded by nature, if not directly in it. Here, Monster's backgrounds and artwork basks in the noir by surrounding its characters with tall houses and villages. A large portion of the series takes place indoors, with large vacant rooms in derelict-looking houses. We start, though, with a hospital. Somehow, the general murkiness of the palette itself creates both a clinical, yet oppressive backdrop. As Kenzo Tenma operates, we get the perfect scene setter, the perfect characters, and the perfect dilemma. Choose to operate on a young boy, or someone closely related to the financial success and continued good favors of the hospital itself. This comes off the cusp of Tenma realizing he had been called to save an opera singer and inadvertently prevented a builder from receiving treatment. He's torn apart by the widow of this man, and it's a big factor into why he does eventually operate on Johan. He's torn further by his girlfriend, the director of the hospital's daughter, Ava, who says, to console him, not all lives are equal. To this, Tenma is at a complete impasse. So, Tenma is easy to see as a perfect heroic protagonist, defying orders and operating on the young Johan. Maybe it's because I first watched the show when I was in high school and so that's how I saw him, but it took me aback, many years later, to see the genuine depth of his character. With the title, Monster, the series is practically an internal struggle of the psyche. From the very first episode, we're positioned almost too well with Tenma. All we see is this servant of his job. He's a doctor to begin with, something which takes years and years of not only training, but money. One of the most respected professions in the entire world. We get a very one-pointed view of a man trapped in his circumstances. He works directly for Dr. Heinemann, and he struggles with trying to convey his sense of morality to Ava, but it just doesn't reach. He's flawed by the lack of morals, and even seems to detest the Heinemanns for it. You might even say he sees them as a bit of a monster. You can see what follows as a straightforward story without anything else apart from the intrigue of it, and it's still a banging time. But Kenzo really goes down a spiritual rabbit hole where he's proving his viewpoint of reality, that all lives are equal, by going with this boy and sticking to his morals, and even dealing with the consequences to his actions. So the perfect wrench of it all is for Johan to end up being a monster. He goes on to be a really intellectual man, and a murderer who just kind of philosophizes and incites chaos. Tenma goes after him to deal with this. He needs to kill Johan to stop the murders. Tenma has interjected himself into having responsibility for this man because he made the choice to save him. But really, that goes against everything that he should be. He's a doctor, he's meant to save lives, and yet, here he is, driven by nothing but feeling the necessity to kill. Not only is that kind of exactly what a serial killer would say, but it goes against the one thing a doctor is supposed to do. By going against his nature, neglecting his duties, like, people still need saving, you could argue Tenma's absence is still actively dooming patients' lives. And I'm just going to throw this out there, but when he starts even neglecting his personal hygiene, all just to kill Johan, his character design changes, and it gets you thinking that maybe, to some degree, Tenma is inadvertently embracing the monster within himself, too. Just as Johan follows his memories of the experiments at Kinderheim 511 and believes in the monster inside of him, he influences and controls people. His sister, Nina, goes by Anna and acts differently when we see her too. There's moments where the audience is almost urged to wonder if there really are two separate people when it taps into the darker side of characters. Their character design at the beginning is striking too. When Johan and Tenma meet in that parking lot, they look to each other with the same hairstyle, one light and one dark. To add to this, Johan's hair never grows or changes style. He never grows facial hair, and for a large part of this first half of the story, his clothes never change. It feeds into the idea of him being more spectral than meets the eye. Another really similar piece of media is Mulholland Drive, and the duality of lives that people live. Monster predates it, so it's unintentional, but there is a character called the Baby, a strange guy who's connected to some of the underworld going on behind closed doors. In his scenes, there's a strange air and atmosphere that's played up in the anime too. He's a bit of an homage to the Arm from Twin Peaks. A strange spirit that gives cryptic retorts and has his own mysterious agendas that are never fully realized. In Monster, he's a small man who clicks his fingers and says, "Let's dance," nonchalantly, whilst the evil about him looms around. It's 100% an homage. In fact, the whole murder mystery aspect is quite similar to Twin Peaks, with a killer hidden in the shadows of a rustic locale. The killer in Twin Peaks, no spoilers here, but even there, David Lynch played on the aspect of the spiritual, and whether or not there was even a killer physically to begin with. Is Johan physically real? Is Killer Bob real? And it's funny, in the reality of these shows, Johan is using those around him to commit the vast majority of these murders, and in Twin Peaks, Killer Bob does use specifically an other person to commit these murders. Urasawa actually said that he was inspired for the initial plot by the American TV show The Fugitive. The story is about a doctor who's accused of murder. The detectives are chasing him, and so he's on the run. He's also a fan of Kubrick and Bong Joon-ho, and he just generally loves cinema. So it's no surprise that his work reflects that kind of storytelling, because he creates manga with themes that are very contrasting. When Tenma operates on the official and unknowingly snubs the construction worker, his widow breaks down, pleading and sobbing to know why Tenma hadn't chosen him. When he tears himself apart over this and ends up operating on Johan and disobeying orders, it's Johan's twin sister Nina who breaks down and begs to know why did he have to save him. Both of these situations are bookends to the first act, the strongest first act I've ever read in manga and seen put to anime. It's the kind of contrast that Maruyama loves working on. Think Perfect Blue and its view of idolization and fanaticism, Hunter x Hunter's Chimera Ants and the chess analogy of the two kings and the pieces beneath them, or even the utter madness of fluffy cinema roll. Maruyama has worked on all of these, and he simply has a good eye for projects. Take a look through his filmography, it's genuinely like half the top entries on Mal. You know what, let me just show you. But yes, he worked on this too, with a clear fascination for Urasawa as a mangaka. He's producing the newest Urasawa anime, Pluto, and it looks just as lush and vibrant as the rest. It'll be the third and final adaptation like this, and it'll be the end of an era, to be honest. The last entry in a trilogy of Kino. One made using cells, one scanned from paper, and now one fully digitalized. The perfect overview of the anime industry, adapting different stories from the same mangaka through different styles in different decades, by a man whose career spans the entire industry, with this being the biggest and in many eyes the best of them all. So yes, in many ways, Maruyama himself is just another piece, not least of all the anime for the series, in the genius of Monster. The soundtrack by Kuniaki Haishima is my favourite, it has to be said. In all of anime, I think it's this, and his work on Master Keaton, that really just blends with Urasawa's work, in the same spiritual way that Hirasawa sounds so good with Berserk. There's a synergy of the noir and the use of classically Western instruments that Haishima just elevates everything with. Accordions and flutes, even bloody harpsichords are in the soundtrack that he makes. The opening is beautiful, that Abbey choir is just hauntingly good. Looking it up, Haishima usually works on television, only sometimes branching out to video games and anime. I think it's a great touch that both Keaton and Monster have an OST that's done by someone who usually creates for a more real, live-action type of production, because it makes the shows feel more like a Japanese Columbo or a deep philosophical murder mystery, because that's what it is. It's just a match made in heaven. There's a soundtrack, Changes, which incorporates Scott vocals from Eileen Dwin. There's just such great vocal reference. Monster sounds amazing. Can you tell I've jumped down the rabbit hole? Unfortunately, the soundtrack for the anime is missing some absolutely phenomenal tracks, some of which sound so good, and I went from top to bottom trying to find for years now. They're simply unreleased, and some of this mastery is just left on the cutting room floor. What a damn shame that is. Now I have to find other soundtracks to put in the background video for an hour. The other music for the endings are also beautifully picked, with the somber ambience of Make It Home by Fujiko Hemming and For the Love of Life by David Sylvian being just as perfect a match as the rest of the OST. David Sylvian said about working with Haishima's vision and working on the series that I was attracted to the monster material by the moral dilemma faced by its central character, the calm surface of the music giving way to darker undercurrents, signifying the conscience of the lead protagonist and the themes of morality, fate, resignation, and free will. Maybe it's because of the length, but in terms of success, this anime has been a little bit snubbed and left under the radar because of it. Originally, it was dubbed and brought over to the West by Salami Studios for the purpose of being aired on Sci-Fi's Monday evening anime slot. This dub is fantastic, with Liam O'Brien and Keith Silverstein providing a perfect duo of Tenma and Johan. Anyway, the first 15 episodes were released on DVD, but due to low sales, the series was discontinued and Viz dropped the license altogether. For years and years, that was it. The only way to watch the anime was through recordings of that sci-fi slot. That's what I had to do. It would take 14 years for Netflix to finally pick the series up, and at first it was just 30 episodes, but thankfully they now have the whole thing. Though even this, I just checked the other night when I got really drunk and wanted to watch that awesome moment on the staircase where it's like, Tenma and Johan, but they only have it in Japanese. So the rights to that masterful dub still exist with bloody Salami Studios. I don't know why Netflix didn't go the extra mile and just pay them, alongside the license for the show itself. It's what they do with half of their anime, but bloody Salami Studios, they can't exactly be unaffordable, especially with Netflix money. Thankfully, they are still in business. They recently did the dub for Cyberpunk Edgerunners, and they have a fully functioning website. So for whatever reason, the ideal monster viewing experience still comes short of the full shebang. Hopefully one day we can just buy the damn thing. It's a testament to the quality of the show itself that despite this, people have found and loved the dub for all of these years. And maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I will actively rewatch this series with that dub, even if it technically entails a voyage to the high seas. It's one of those instances where I really would rather be paying for it, but yeah, I remember how much I wanted those first 15 episodes on that American DVD, but it was for a Region 1 player, so it was useless to me. It's a shame, because Netflix is really good with their anime and even the dubbing. After all, Cyberpunk Edgerunners was a Netflix exclusive. They literally have Salami Studios in their contact list. It just bugs me that Monster isn't available in dub. But you know what, let me just email them. I'll put some lovely music on a bit louder for a bit, and let's just get this all sorted. Dear Netflix, there's no English dub for the Monster anime. Monster has a really good dub by Salami Studios, and I've linked it up. It seems like they also dub Cyberpunk Edgerunners, a Netflix exclusive. Because you worked with them in the past, I would love it if you could source the English dub of Monster from Salami Studios and add it to the site. The dub itself is very popular among fans, and its addition would be very noteworthy. I also see that you have the streaming rights for Pluto, another anime that shares many similarities to Monster. Perhaps with Salami dubs that too, you can snap that dub while trying. All the best, Alex Enterprises. There, they'll probably think I'm a kid, but hey, if they add the dub, then let it be forever known that it was me. Between the dub and the unreleased music, you seriously don't want to know how much I'd pay for a collector's edition with everything in it. They could even finally officially translate Another Monster into English, because that never made it over here either. Upscale Blu-ray of all 76 episodes, official soundtrack, and Another Monster, please, and thank you. For a while, there was talks of a live-action film or series being made for HBO, with Guillermo del Toro being interested in bringing it to the small screen. Whilst a live-action adaptation doesn't interest me whatsoever, I have to admit that Del Toro would be the perfect candidate to make it a reality. He's currently making an adaptation of The Buried Giant, the best book I've ever read, and after Pinocchio, I just think his stance on animation and the amount of stuff he's consumed make him perfect for doing Monster. But unfortunately HBO passed and it went back to the pitching stage. The action of the second act in this series is something that I think was explored in the anime a little bit better, if not for any other reason than the fact that the action physically moves. The manga is great and laid out in an easy to read format, but the directing choices that Masayuki Kojima made and the pacing of those sequences makes for a great way to experience the story. When the baby tries to blow up Romberg and we get the cutting perspectives of Tenma, Nina, Dieter, and Heckle, it makes for really good television. With the chapters being reliably 26 pages each, a 2-chapter combo made for really well laid out episodes with an intermission right at the centre. When Johan meets with Carl atop the roof, it's a simply designed couple of manga pages. Sure, the contextual event is one that gives off apprehension in the reader, but the anime, with the nature of full-screen television, feels more dynamic when it puts the two in frame and lingers. The show has the benefit of reveling in the suspense of the moment. It's truly one of those adaptations which actually adds to the source material because of this. 2-page spreads are actually quite rare in this manga, so the show gets to bring those pages to life and the more ordinary pages in a wholly separate way. The legacy of this amazing series just chugging along with the years is immense, and a big part of that is because of the incredible anime adaptation that succeeded the manga. Another feather in the cap of reasons for why Monster is so genius. But now that we've talked extensively about that anime, it's time to come back to what brought us here in the first place, and finally approach the Monster manga. To take a step away from the anime and to talk about the manga for a bit, there's a lot to be said for it. To begin, the story itself all started here. Despite having a medical-based starting point, the detective element of the story comes through, and it's interesting to see how they apply psychology to the events that take place. The referral to Becker, Pilyavin, and Milgram was surprising to see. I watched the series first, and I was legitimately floored when I started studying psychology, and seeing how all these studies and members of the psychological society were all real, and tied together into the discussions and theories of the characters, to brainstorm ideas around Johann and the conspiratorial nature of the plot. They use profiling and circle hypothesis to try and establish Johann's location, all very real, deductive reasoning. Maybe Monster isn't so much genius as much as Naoki Urasawa is. He details a really vivid look into the Berlin Wall and the identities of people living in Germany, even going to great lengths to talk about the entire history of the Czechoslovakian people. I think a big part of this is his upbringing. He graduated at Mesa University and studying economics, not wanting to be a professional mangaka, after recognizing at a young age the differentiation between non-commercialized manga and that which was made just for money. He never wanted to make manga like that himself, and so he didn't pursue it professionally. The genuineness shines through his work because of it, and I think it almost ironically charged interest with his audience and proved to be successful in the end. He writes a manga by visualizing the movie trailer in his head, an assemblage of ideas which he builds up to and works towards, then links up with story beats that he doesn't know until he reaches them. He's a fan of Hollywood movies and gone on record to have liked The Shining, Taxi Driver, and 2001: A Space Odyssey. He says that his manga is a bit like a film storyboard, though he'd never agree to direct a film because of the limiting aspects of production. He says, with manga, all you need is a blank page of paper and a pencil. Some people might not want to read manga when the anime has such great positives to it. You might think, oh, it's not got the opening, and that does so much for the atmosphere of the anime alone. Here's how the manga starts in comparison. And I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And they worshipped the dragon which gave power unto the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast, who is able to make war with him? The Revelation of St. John the Divine, 13:1-4. A creepy, foreboding biblical excerpt with a chilling illustration to match. I think it's not too dissimilar to the whole Zarathustra gaze into the abyss and the abyss gazes back to you type of thing, where who makes war with a beast? It kind of alludes to only another beast could do that. And then that brings up the whole Tenma kind of matching Johann to a degree, and that whole comparison. But let's take a look in the good book. Apparently this is directly talking about the Antichrist. Holy shit. According to BibleRef, this chapter exposes 2 evil men, beasts who serve the devil. The first beast arises from the sea, presumably the Mediterranean. The second beast arises from the land, probably Israel. The first beast dominates the final form of the Roman Empire, and sets himself up as a god, to be worshipped. This first figure is the one most often labelled as Antichrist. The second beast acts as prophet, priest, and king in Israel. As such, he imitates Christ, but he is a false prophet. But obviously this is all thematic nuance to what is a young boy in East Germany subjected to a secret military program to produce a super soldier. It's just a foreboding cover to the mystery at hand, and it's done really, really well. The watercolour paintings which Urasawa made are just beautiful, and paint the noir nature of the series in a different and refreshing light when compared to your everyday manga pages. His style is one which is very rare, in that it's both cartoonish and can be drawn in a realistic way to achieve different effects. In a series where things can quickly turn dark and weird, this is a brilliant thing. The cartoonish element acts as a window to easily convey emotional sequences, funny moments, and just delicate feelings. With the use of shadows, hatchings, and watercolours, we obviously get the more realistic look to the manga. It's the same kind of look that Yoshihiro Togashi does, with a cartoon character like Gon, sometimes having these realistic styles put onto him, usually to show the darker side of his character. I think Urasawa's style just really blends best with a noir type of storytelling, so in manga format, Monster actually stands higher than anything else. When it comes to Kenzo Tenma, his lengthening hair and beard throughout the series is a really immersive touch that Urasawa added to his character. There's a Czechoslovakian children's picture book in the story written by Franz Bonaparte under the alias of Emil Scherb. The book is called Obluda, or The Monster Who Didn't Have a Name. Once upon a time, in a land far away, there lived a nameless monster. The monster was dying to have a name, so the monster set out on a journey to find one. But the world was a very large place. The monster split into two and went on their way. One monster went east, one went to the west. The monster who went to the east found a village. At the village's entrance there lived a blacksmith. "Mr. Blacksmith, give me your name," said the monster. "I can't give you my name," the blacksmith replied. "In return for giving me your name, I'll go inside of you and make you strong. If you make me strong, I'll give you my name." The monster went inside the blacksmith. Thus, the monster became Otto the blacksmith. Otto the blacksmith was the strongest man in the village. But then one day, look at me, the monster inside me is getting so big. Munch munch, chomp chomp, gobble gobble, gulp. The hungry monster ate Otto from the inside out. Once again, he was a monster without a name. When he went inside Hans the shoemaker, however, munch munch, chomp chomp, gobble gobble, gulp. When he went inside Thomas the hunter, munch munch, chomp chomp, gobble gobble, gulp. The monster was nameless once again. The monster went to a castle to find a nice name. Inside the castle lived a sick boy. "If you give me your name, I'll make you strong. If you can heal my illness and make me strong, then I'll give you my name." The monster went inside the boy. The boy became full of vigor. The king was overjoyed. The prince is healthy. The monster liked the boy's name. He also liked living in the castle, so he restrained himself even though he was hungry. But the hunger became just too great. "Look at me, look at me. The monster inside me has gotten this big," said the boy. The boy devoured the king and all of his servants. Munch munch, chomp chomp, gobble gobble, gulp. Everyone was gone, so the boy went on a journey. He walked for days and days. One day the boy came upon the monster who had gone west. "I have a name. It's a wonderful name," said the boy. The monster who went west replied, "I don't need a name. I'm perfectly happy without one. That's what we are, nameless monsters." The boy ate up the monster who went west. At last he had found a name, but there was no longer anyone around to call him by it. Such a shame, because Johann was such a wonderful name. It's written so well and illustrated so beautifully that it genuinely fooled me and many others into thinking that the book was real. It's not, it's fiction within fiction, but wait a second. This book, which could be called The Origin of the Johann Case, is also famous for being Naoki Urasawa's first translation from Czech. Emil Sieb, Jacob Farubek, Klaus Popp, all different pen names for the same author. There was something peculiar in each of his works that left a bad feeling in one's mouth. But what kind of effect would it have on the reader? What was the message, if any, and what was the author's intention? It was clearly a work with an unforgettable aftertaste, but there was nothing more one could say for certain. It wasn't even clear exactly who Sieb was. Okay, so no, it's not real. It's one last wool over the eyes, creating a really fun way of making us buy it existing one last time, in the form of another monster. But wait, what? Wikipedia says the credit sequence features illustrations from the book Obluda Terra Nemes Ve Menho, I'm probably butchering that, The Monster Who Didn't Have a Name by Emil Scherb, which was published by Shogakukan on 30th of September 2008. So going to that page, Urasawa basically released the illustrations for the different stories that end up in the manga and released them in this book. A cool idea, but Christ, even the Wikipedia is getting in on it. Speaking of inexistent media, there's an in-universe television show called The Magnificent Steiner, about a hero who's the son of a religious cult's leader. They prohibit emotions altogether, with anger being the most taboo reaction of them all. The belief of this cult is that you could amass the power of repressed emotions and become closer to God, and even produce psychic abilities. The hero had undergone severe training under this as a child, and had therefore never expressed anger. One day, however, somebody attacks the cult, and murders everyone except for the children. The hero, Steiner, is away from the scene as this happens, and only returns in time to see the murder of his father. In that intense moment, 20 years of repression transforms him into the Magnificent Steiner, killing the attackers. But it turns out the attackers were a group orchestrated by the parents of those children who had been whisked away against their will. Steiner goes away, realizing he's the monster, and decides to search for the details of those who'd initiated this cult and how his father could have been involved with such a thing. It also turned out that the final episode was divisive. The creators felt an evil force emanating from the show and had to create a different ending from the one they initially wanted to go with. In the original ending, Steiner's father faked his own death by using his own powers. He then followed Steiner. In this ending, Steiner reunites with his mother, who tells him never to use his powers again, no matter the cost. When Steiner's father appears and murders his mother in front of him, Steiner activates his powers once more, murders his father, and can never change back again, having fully changed into a monster for good. In the new ending, the father could brainwash people. So not only did he survive that first attack, but he brainwashes the entire population into creating Nazi America. Steiner makes a barricaded community out of those who haven't been brainwashed, and they end up forming their own army of sorts. In this ending, Steiner activates his ability once again, but this time he ends up murdering his father and those who are brainwashed, alongside even his own followers, who would set up their own army. In the bloody aftermath, Steiner is alone, surrounded by those who survived the carnage and who have now taken to deifying him as a cult around the magnificent Steiner, doomed to wander the decimated earth as a ruler of a fanatical cult, just like his father. You can see the echoing beats from the main story of Johann wandering around looking for those responsible for Kinderheim 511, but then his own mental state resulting in the deaths of hundreds around him. It's a creepy little foreshadowing of the unfurling mystery, and between the monster without a name and the magnificent Steiner and the different narratives they tell, you're still left guessing as to what the truth of Johann is, because both of these stories send you off in different directions. In Another Monster, it's detailed that it used Synchro-Vox animation, where they would superimpose actors' mouths onto the painted cells of the characters, and it gives off a perfectly creepy vibe, which simultaneously enriches the story, but my god, I'm glad this didn't stick around. When it comes to the manga, once again, the perfect edition is deserving of its name. Originally just your average tankobon release, Viz reprinted the manga in a high quality, strengthened paperback with 2 volumes worth of content, interspersed with these lovely watercolor pages printed on beautiful quality paper, and with a nice pair of protective pages from beginning to end. It's kind of a step up from the Viz Big editions, which they also made for series like Vagabond, which was a reprint for that series, this time compiling 3 volumes into one, with some nice color pages. But the outer layer was a more fragile paper, and due to the size and amount of content, the glue had issues keeping the pages in. Here, these volumes are sturdy collections, which end up looking like murder mystery novels, and their front covers even feature the same picture frames from the opening of the anime. A nice attention to detail from Viz, where scenes from the manga are framed, and if you line up the volumes together, they end up creating a whole big picture. Kind of like what they did with the spines of the Vagabond edition, but here, it's done on the covers, so it ends up being a great big landscape to pan across, just like the opening to the show. There's an in-depth sound glossary at the end with notations for each page, so as to not in any way tarnish the original presentation of the work. At the front of the volumes, there's even artwork highlighted by a little graphic page. It's so cool. I love this edition so much. In terms of where the characters are at after the series, it is cool that Urasawa wrote Another Monster himself. He didn't just hand out the license, he personally delved one last time into this world. Eva Heinemann becomes a kitchen designer consultant. Through her special veil of haughtiness, she does see the error of her ways, and cleans up from her alcoholism and general sleaziness. But when asked by the detective, who is the viewpoint character in Another Monster, if she still thinks whether or not all lives are equal, she answers, yes, I still do. The further details of the author behind the nameless monster and the upbringing of Johann, and the secret experiments at Kinderheim 511, were explored a little here. In the show, we find out that the author, Franz Bonaparte, had a role to play in Kinderheim 511, but it also turns out that this mystery man in the background, who published these unsavory books, and went on a myriad of different identities, is actually directly related to Johann. As you'd expect, this reveals to us that he's a very sick individual, experimenting on his family, and directly propagating horrific events, with the actual entirety of Monster being practically a footnote to his depravity. The lore of Monster is surprisingly good. Urasawa uses his vast knowledge around the history of the Berlin Wall and creates a series of conspiracies that all branch off and interweave to create a scattered but tangibly feasible mystery book. Johann is the result of a lot of fucked up things. Going from different witnesses and interviews, it seems that as remnants of a World War II era, this man and the many people around him were attempting to set up their own leadership for the country, with Bonaparte as the head. Another Monster isn't about Johann's successor, it's about his forebears, and it becomes very much apparent that Bonaparte, or the society that he made living in the shadows, is still out there, living in secrecy. Following phone numbers and visiting flats, Bonaparte has seemingly disappeared. It's creepy, and it's that uncertain atmosphere creeping in the background that is just so genius with this series. It makes you wonder, who is the real boogeyman? His picture books are brought to life in the anime, not just the monster without a name, but the man with the big eyes and the man with the big mouth. The manga is creepy enough, but with that amazing soundtrack, that ever so off colour palette, and the tremendous voice acting, you almost wish to see a whole miniseries just filled with Bonaparte's creepy works. They're just downright unsettling. Bonaparte's son is found and questioned, and there are sketches for new characters by Urasawa, but also real-life images. It adds a real touch to the book, and kind of lines up with the manga, which did take real-life locations. They could seriously have made like an OVA or maybe even a made-for-TV movie for Another Monster. There's some great material, and it's mostly in the form of interviews, so it wouldn't even be too hard to produce, like animation-wise. It has a great suspense to it despite that type of more relaxed content, and its ending is great. I wish simply storyboarded suspense was more common in today's media, especially with anime nowadays. The detective of this book, Werner Weber, ends up in a rural hotel, finding out that one of Bonaparte's pen names has produced another work. This is after the events of the story. This is after the real Franz Bonaparte, if that can even be confirmed, has died. Inspector Lunge warns him to be careful. The phone call is cut off, and a new voice replaces Lunge. This voice belongs to a man in the room next door. He answers all of Weber's questions, but has something to show him. The book ends there, handwritten by Werner Weber, and Werner Weber is never seen ever again. His notes remained, and alongside them, a single rushed sketch of the man in question. And the man looks a lot like Johann. That would make sense. It's not completely out of the question, but it isn't exactly the vibe that we were left with at the end of Monster. But the whole book does go to great efforts to make it feel as though that secret society is still out there, and maybe it wasn't Johann. I kind of hope it wouldn't be. I was a bit more hopeful for his story reaching a resolution, and I'll get to that in a little bit. It's purposefully left up to fan interpretation, but it would seem the killings have resumed. After all, when Johann ran away from the hospital with his sister all those years ago, he went by the name Franz. So if we think back, we also have been conditioned into thinking Franz Bonaparte might not be Franz Bonaparte. The whole mystery, once again, coming full circle. I find Monster kind of terrifying, to be honest, and the more you think about it, the more terrifying it actually gets. And the book, too. It's something about the commitment to realism that makes the level of threat and malice so tense. When you have these taboo children's picture books like The Door That Should Never Be Opened, it gives a perfect foreboding metaphor for the manga itself. Maybe we really shouldn't want to know what's behind the door, because anything could be there. It's Suspense 101, but it's drawn out to such a degree and plays mind games with its plot so often that your mind is kind of left reeling, and it's easy to find things pretty disturbing when the bottom of the barrel just keeps getting deeper and darker. "Let's make a deal, let's make a deal," said the demon. "No, not at all," said the man with the big eyes. "Sure, let's make a deal," said the man with the big mouth. The man with the big mouth grew a beautiful garden. The man with the big eyes was very hungry because he was very poor. The man with the big mouth had fun every day. The man with the big mouth was very full from eating the fruit from his garden, so he didn't realize what was happening. He didn't realize that his garden was drying up. By the time he noticed, it was too late. The man with the big mouth cried and cried in the garden that never grew again. "I shouldn't have made a deal with the demon." The man with the big eyes was dying from hunger. Tears were trickling down from his big eyes as he cried out, "I should have made a deal with the demon. Let's make a deal, let's make a deal," said the demon. Franz Bonaparte's stories are just as creepy to the characters as they are to us, and it's that commitment to the realism that gives it that extra creep factor. We're with Tenma when we're reading these things, and I remember almost dreading for him to put the books down, like what on earth is going to happen after this? The story makes you feel vulnerable, but the setting of the characters when they read these stories makes them vulnerable, and it creates a suspense that doubles down and makes the whole thing just dreadful. The immense feeling of dread that these books evoke is off the frickin' charts, but it goes beyond that. Even transcending the chronology of the story itself, this story has become a monster. That image at the beginning of the manga, the creepy one with the biblical verse and the haunting man, the one that sets the tone of the series so well, that is Franz Bonaparte, the man in the shadows who set the wheel in motion and watched from the sidelines, the true monster. He's been there from the start, the very first page, watching us, looking right back at the audience without us even knowing it. He comes up late in the story as things conclude, but he gets gunned down pretty quick. It's probably the one massive downside to Monster. When you have a story start out as strong as this, the execution of the little details will be under such a high bar to surpass. It's like a song of ice and fire. George Martin introduced so many characters, so many plots, so many motivations, and he's such a perfectionist that it just takes him longer and longer to get any of it written to page. It's commendable that Urasawa just commits to the story and let it take a life of its own, but the ending is divisive because of it. And I think one big powder keg fight in Ruinheim isn't what I was personally after. We had no emotional connection to anyone in the town, so Grimmer's death genuinely just aggravated me. As poetic as it is, Bonaparte popping up and popping off made me audibly sigh. It's nice that Tenma and Johan get the spotlight all the way to the end, but the story kind of stopped being just about them, so for the excess plot to be trimmed like it did, and Bonaparte to literally be killed by one of the townsfolk, it felt like Urasawa didn't want to commit to more elements of an ending that he didn't want to write. Maybe that's why he wrote Another Monster. He eventually found what he wanted to write about the character. And that's good, so I'm glad he did. The book is another part of why Monster is genius, but it ain't directly part of Monster, so that's probably my one genuine complaint for the entire series. It's equally impressive that that's my one complaint, but also immensely disappointing that it's for one of the most integral parts of the story. He gaffed it at the end, a little bit. That's the thing with continuing narratives though. You can drop the ball at any time and things can go down a peg or two. Like, with Master Keaton, sure, there were some episodes I didn't like. There's one where there's this clearly toxic father and son relationship, and Keaton does try to reconcile the two, but they kind of maintain an unhealthy relationship by the end, and it's a very disrespectful one. It kind of reminds me of the traditionalism of Japanese family roles, and it just doesn't really work for the German setting. Like when Keaton is all smiles at the end, it really just falls flat. Like, bro, you have nothing to be happy about and you have accomplished nothing. These guys are maybe at a push ready for some serious family counseling, and they are never gonna get that. It was a dud episode, and there's a few of them. I didn't like the first episode of Keaton either, but it being episodic means that the bad episodes don't put the good episodes down a peg at all, because there's no crossover going on. If anything, it's impressive that the key characters are all introduced in episodes that are like 10 out of 10s. It makes the ending of the series and the overall rating of the series hard to put lower than anything like a 9, which is what I've given it by the way. With Monster, it has a really long stretch of golden moments, but yeah, that part of the ending blows, in my opinion, actually just blows. Just having Bonaparte be carted off to the slammer would have been a much more interesting outcome than what we got. That's that part of the ending that I have fault with. In terms of the actual ending, I think it's actually fine. I watched it when I was like 14 years old, so I was outraged initially, but thinking back on it, it's actually kind of morphed me into liking that kind of storytelling. Alan Wake once said that Stephen King once said that nightmares exist outside of logic, and there's little fun to be had in explanations. They're antithetical to the poetry of fear. In a horror story, the victim keeps asking why, but there can be no explanation, and there shouldn't be one, because the unanswered mystery is what stays with us the longest, and it's what we'll remember in the end. It also reminds me of Twin Peaks and David Lynch once again. After 25 years, Lynch brought the series back once more, and said that he loved the idea of mystery in conjunction with a continuing story. To go deeper and deeper into a world, and discover more and more things, a feature film has an ending, a continuing story doesn't. In an interview with Crunchyroll, Urasawa even said something similar about his own fascination with the idea of a mystery. Many of your works can be considered part of the mystery genre. What about the way mystery stories are structured appeals to you? I think a lot of that comes down to what we perceive as being fun or intriguing. You could take a lot of popular TV shows. I'm sure you all have been in the situation of saying, oh, I have to find out what happens next, and you binge through episodes 1, 2, 3, 4. Every story that is able to do that to its audience has an element of mystery. You can even take a love story. If you're binging it and you're curious about what happens next, then I think there's a strong element of mystery there. That's the core of what makes a narrative so intriguing. I feel like the true ending to Monster is brilliant for this. When I first watched it, I thought, damn, he got away, this is just going to be a nightmare for everyone. Then when I mulled it over and wanted to give myself some actual closure, I actually thought he jumped out the window and tried to kill himself. Then I thought, maybe he really was in Tenma's head all along, from the very beginning. But then I just thought, it's a vehicle. It's a vehicle to a perfect open ending where you apply your own thoughts to it. Much like Twin Peaks, and much like Alan Wake, and much like 2001, the film at least. We don't really see much. Johan could have just rolled under the bed, so that when Tenma gets close, he can go boo. The ending is perfect to apply your own comprehension of the story into it, and that's all it's meant to be. All that we do get to see is that it's that similarity again. The twins went missing from their beds, and a scream was heard. Junkers went missing from his bed, and a guard had been poisoned. Johann ends up missing from his bed, and... the continuing story continues, and it's time to dream. Johann was brought up on those books of Bonaparte's, The Value of a Name. Johann went about and erased the people who knew about him, one by one. The story of a monster without a name who went throughout the town taking name after name and then left with nobody, left with nothing but the thought that it was such a shame because Johann was such a wonderful name. After systematically doing this and then surviving, the whole world knowing about him, he's defeated the narrative that Bonaparte sets up. It doesn't matter what happens next, because it's simultaneously the end of that whole narrative and the beginning of another. And in this new narrative, having defeated the story that its master set up, the monster no longer exists. Everything from Monster and Master Keaton would go forward in Urasawa's career with his next works. The equally conspiratorial 20th Century Boys is, and I really don't even mean to keep saying the same things again and again, but it's one of the best manga ever made, maybe even more loved than Monster. Personally, I do prefer Monster, but that's just me. It does seem like most of the people who have read both do seem to end up liking 20th Century Boys even more, and it is absolutely incredible for what it's worth. I feel like most of the people who think Monster has a slump in the second half probably go on to find 20th Century Boys more entertaining, because 20th Century Boys takes the suspense and makes it its entire identity. Monster starts out this way, but quickly fizzles out into a character study drama, and shifts from Johann to Bonaparte for that intrigue, whereas the intrigue of 20th Century just kind of keeps going and going and going. They even made a trilogy of full-blown live-action films for it, which, technically speaking, says a lot about its popularity in Japan. But yeah, Billy Bat I also love reading too. He somehow created a really compelling story 3 separate times for big underground conspiracy series and pulled it off time after time after time. Hopefully one day we can get an anime for either of these series too. But right now, my mind is firmly on Pluto, the end of an era. But yes, Monster is one of my favourite anime and it always will be. I hope I've conveyed that to you, if you didn't believe it. I also love how this super long video eventually turns into a bit of a journal as days go by and I find out new things about the author and stuff. Like for example, today I literally learnt that Urasawa has a YouTube channel. It's literally so wholesome. Here he is, this 60-year-old man, drawing new official images of Keaton, Tenma, and others he's drawn over the years, just for humble how to draw videos. This is as recent as this year. Urasawa seems a lovely person, and how can he not be, I guess, with some of the most sublime and touching drama that you could ask for. Naoki Urasawa is the sole creator for the manga, and it shows. The guy is clearly a genius of the artist world, and thereby the biggest, most important point as to why Monster is absolute genius. Thanks for watching. This has been the longest that I've ever rattled on for, the longest video on the channel by far. So thanks if you've got through it all, and you're here. You made it. One thing to note, and I'm sure that people will probably be asking below, but the book, Another Monster, actually doesn't have an official translation into English. Funnily enough, it has a translation into French, so there are some translations floating out there. In this case, it's a double translation, so there may be glaring errors in that. But I should say special thanks to a man simply named Stephen, who translated the sections that I used years and years ago on a forum. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks also to my patrons, who enjoy early access to scripts and videos, and even get to watch a few Patreon exclusive ones at that. You could join them for a single $1 a month. If not, be sure to like and subscribe for more, and have a wonderful night.